Whoa, people. Whoa. Almost didn't make it today. Almost did not get live. Allahu Akbar. Un momento. Let me see. ¿Dónde estamos? Alright. Oh, there we are. Right. Abeyar. Alright. Peoples, mi gente. Alright. ¿Cómo están? إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فالسلام الله على القوم. أهلا وسهلا بكم ومرحبا. بخير راغله people. Juan Ying Lights. Bienvenidos a todos. Khushamadid and swagatam. People, what is going on? What is going on? See, I was almost held back today by the demons. Those of you that do not know, today I will be sharing a secret, un secreto. And that is that it appears, people, that I have been dabbling in the dark arts. Ooh. So, right, wait there. So, today's Mufti Masala segment will be me explaining why I'm in the dark arts, why I dabble in these dark arts, and what that's all about. Alright, and apparently my demons and my jinns who are like that with me, you see, we're homies. So we're going to talk all about that, since people are victimized. I'm undermining the term. They are traumatized. They are tragedized. I need more grandiose terms here. It's not quite befitting. People are suffering because apparently I've been sending a bunch of jinns to attack people. Yes, zulm. But it is what it is, people. Asiyas. So I'm going to speak all about that a little later on, about the people that I've been sending jinns to attack. Because apparently they've got the truth out of the jinns, you see, and the jinns have confessed. Those people, these jinns ain't loyal. These jinns ain't loyal, people. No matter how many shirky sacrifices I did for these jinn. Magar jo bewafa hota hai, wo bewafa hi hota hai. So the jinns have gone and informer jinn. They inform on me, right? So they've confessed that it's Abu Layth who has sent us. This I'm not making up. This is actually a real event, but I'm gonna get to that at the end of this today's episode in the Mufti Masala segment. We'll look at the jinns that I've been sending and these disloyal, heartbreaking, ruthless, informer jinns that have kind of dobbed me in. We'll be speaking about that a little later on. That's it, man. Snitches get stitches. These these jinn, I'm going to have to put a hit on their head now. I'm going to have to call my other jinn to put a hit on these jinn's head. Right, so, but we've got a lot of other things to talk about as well today. So, peoples, let me just bring this up. Keep the questions at hand. So the comments are disabled in the YouTube. Alright. You know, I'll tell you how this works. I will check. You know, this is almost like the Copenhagen interpretation in quantum physics. That I'm serious. Whenever I observe the YouTube comments, they're always disabled. So it will work that I will, you know, before going live on YouTube, the times that I will go into YouTube to check, it will say chat disabled. So I'll say, well, okay. And I'll do that, let's say, so many times in a row. And then one time I'll be like, okay, let it just go. Because let's say I'm running late. And that day the chats will be enabled. And I'll think, oh, that's odd. Next week I'll remember, like today I checked and it's disabled. Yeah, who's playing these games? You know, the jinn. YouTube, it's a conspiracy, people. It's a conspiracy. But other than that, people, what we'll be taking a look at today, right, so what we'll be taking a look at is a few things. I've listed a few topics. I do also, what I haven't listed, and I'll be going through as well, so you can click like, click share. I've come across another video by that, I think his name is Ismail, but he has a channel, Don't Convert to Islam. So in this video, Robin said last week's class was really good, Mufti. Shukran, Robin. Shukran and bienvenidos. It's always a pleasure to see you online here. Ralia, shukran. Right. People tuning in, click like, click share. So I will be taking a look at, there's a new video by Abu Adam Ismail, who was a convert, a white convert. He then left Islam. I think he's a Christian now. So he's got a video on the plagiarism. I've forgotten what it's called now. I think, but it's along the lines of, is the Quran plagiarized, or the Quran is plagiarized, something like that. Now, but today he's released a part 2 saying that the Quran was plagiarized from the ancient poets of Arabia, namely Imra al-Qays, the Malik al-Dhillil, the libertine king, people. Allah. Right, so a favorite of many, one that appeals to that human rascality. Right, so Imra al-Qays is a legend in his own right, and we'll speak about him. But he feels that Ismail Abu Adam feels that the Quran was plagiarized from Imra al-Qays, who is really just a generation, you know, more or less a generation or two, depending how you're measuring generations, before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But these are the celebrities in the time of the Prophet. So when the Prophet was growing up, the celebrities that all the Arabs spoke about were the poets. People like Nabigha al-Zubyani, people like Al-Asha, people like Labid, like Imra al-Qays, Tarafa, all these kind of people. So did the Prophet plagiarize the Quran from him? This is the claim that Ismail Abu Adam has made. So I want to, although I hadn't scheduled that, but I want to respond to that. You know, this Islam, knocking over this Islam is not that easy, you know. They have to first of all go through me, you know, this one. So so I would like to respond to his claim on poetry and things like this in today's session. In addition to that, right, okay, no idea. I'm just trying to read a question, a comment, but it's not making any sense to me, so No idea. I think somebody's just... I also wanted to speak about some random topics, like, I mean, not random, relevant, but one is on the Babri Masjid in India, the case from the Supreme Court. And also, so the decision has come through, and so what are our thoughts about that? Right, so the other thing is the Pakistani famous actor Hamza Abbassi has made a statement recently about wishing to devote more time to religious dialogical discourses and moving away from the showbiz industry. Now, although I don't watch many Pakistani films, don't think I've hardly watched any, right? But obviously Hamza Abbassi is a huge name, and he's somebody I'm definitely very impressed by intellectually, and I'd like to maybe, what are my thoughts on that? So these are, and people, lest I forget, the problem with the far left, we need to address this. Tough talk, people, needs to be done. Chalo ho jaye. You know, when you're doing so many pange, pange is like the panga, hashtag panga. This is panga, we call in our language. This is in, they say in Punjabi as well, and Mirpuri and all the Patwari languages, that it's when you when you're looking for trouble, you know, the panga, you cause the panga. So, but what the hell? I think this is a serious issue. I would like to address this, the far left. I think it is a huge problem and it needs to be addressed. But cool. So, any questions? Let's take a look at that. Do remember to click like, click share, people. Right. Spread the love, people. Spread the fitan wa fasad. You never know, you know. You never know, people. आवाज दे के देख लो शायद वो मिल ही जाए. अल्लाह. आवाज दे के देख लो शायद वो मिल ही जाए. वरना ये उम्र भर का सफर रायगा तो है. Allah, Allah, Allah. He says that at the very least you might as well just cry out and yell. Perhaps you might find the person or the thing that you're looking for by yelling out. You never know. The poet says that Varna ye umar bhar ka safar raayega to hai. Otherwise this journey of life is just going to waste anyway. These people are some of the wise words, huh? Hi. So what is going? Let's take some of your questions. Not seen you in the gym. Yeah, I've been on a break for, I think it's, so far it's been 4 weeks. I've not been to the gym, and probably another 2 weeks. So I'd been told you've got to stay off for about 4 to 6 weeks in between. So 1, to recover. So I had a little fracture, and 2, I thought, you know what, I thought it's a good time. What I'll do is I'll use the time to cut down instead. So I've been actually, I mean, you can't really see today because I've been wearing a Jummah, but I've been cutting down quite substantially. And I thought what I'll do is I'll cut down. In fact, I've just bought a spin bike. Just had it assembled today. So I thought what I'm going to do is these remaining 1-2 weeks, I'm going to further cut down. I'm taking some of those supplements. It seems to be working wonders, honestly. I noticed the other day that my jeans had gone loose for, and I just wear a size 32, and that had gone loose for me. I was like, whoa. So people, it seems to be working. And carnitine, carnitine, people, L-carnitine works wonders, honestly. Obviously many other things as well. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing. I'm cutting down, and then I'm hoping to, in about 2 weeks time, to start 1-2 weeks and then hit it hard and heavy. and then just proper, once again, lean muscle, build it up, stack it up again. So that's my personal, my personal little mini project going on. But yeah. Right, so let's take a look at some of your questions. First of all, people, what's bothering the awesome minds? What's preoccupying the awesome minds of me, my amazing Facebook gente, mi gente? I can't obviously see the questions today on YouTube, thank God. No, I'll open this as well soon. Soon come, soon come. They do mention each other. I can't see. Abu was Rayhana forced to marry Muhammad. We should look into lean gains. Yep, I am. I'm looking into a lot of. Got my own little thing going on. Is there a secret to muqata'a in the Quran? Are there any village wars going on? How did angels fight against the hostile polytheists at Badr? Ah, interesting. Es muy interesante. You see, let's take this question first, people. You see, it's interesting that the Battle of Badr, okay, first of all, depicting the Battle of Badr, the companions and the Prophet's side, the believers, as they were then known, al-mu'minun, they were, one, not in huge quantities. People, there's a famous number 313, 313, but it's not necessary that they were 313. They may have just been 300, 300 and whatever, an odd number. But the point is, they were outnumbered. That part seems to be, you know, what the evidence clearly suggests, that the army of Quraysh were probably at least 1,000 strong. And the believers did not want to engage in any kind of warfare. But they were prepared for it. Like, they weren't prepared, but they were, you know, hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. It was that mentality. But they were hoping that they were just able to reach the place, and because the whole thing was to do with the caravan arriving. And they didn't want it to be intercepted by the Quraysh before they could get to the caravan. And so this is what the race was to. It was to the caravan. Now, the dangers were, if Quraysh got there in time before them, there was going to be a showdown, face-off. And they weren't in a good position to take on, because they were heavily outnumbered. They were not militarily equipped very well. I mean, they had swords, but that's it, really. You know, they had a few spears, a few horses. They weren't really, they were just, apart from, I mean, they did have swords and things like that, but they weren't, compared to the other people who came camelback and horseback and, you know, with all these kind of drums beating and all these people making a big hoo-ha, really prepared, a whole parade for war. So, now, as it happened, the Quran cites the believers saying that they were hoping that it was not going to be a war outcome. But yet Allah says in the Quran, but yet Allah, what Allah had destined was to be. And the point is that there is a clash, there is a face-off, they turn up, the Quraysh are there. Now, the believers do stand their ground and they fight passionately. Battle of Badr is overwhelmingly a clear success for the believers, and it obviously reinforces the entire faith structure. And it was a very moving, emotional kind of battle, because one, they didn't want to, you know, sometimes when you're pushed against a corner, you come out of it fighting really hard. So so they were kind of just fed up. And it's a very, and even some of the ahadith that transmit the final du'as, I mean not the final, but the du'as, the final du'as before warfare of the Prophet, where he says to, where he makes a du'a that, Ya Allah, in tuhlak hadhi al-isaba, lan tu'bad fil ard. That this is all there is of the believers. If they today perish, you will not be worshipped on this earth. It's as simple as that. And it is an amazing, very emotional kind of event that takes place. Now, later on, you see, Allah describes in the Quran that they were reinforced and assisted with angelic help. Now, is this literary usage or is this actual physical descriptions? Many Muslims will believe that this is just literary, kind of symbolic usage of language. Like when Allah says in the Quran, for example, about the Bay'atul Ridwan, that when they made a pledge to avenge Uthman, because they thought Uthman, this is later on in Medina, had been killed, but he hadn't. And the Prophet took a Bay'atul Ridwan, he took a pledge till the end with some believers around him. And Allah says, وَيَدُ اللَّهِ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمْ. You know, they put their hands on top of you and Allah placed his hand above their hand. Now this, nobody believes that to be literal. They all take that to be kind of symbolic usage to mean that God is with you. So this thing when Allah says there were, 5,000 angels or, thousands of angels we sent reinforcing you. Was this about reinforcing your determination, your ability, your steadfastness in the face of adversity? Is that what it was? Or were these literal kind of anthropomorphic, like men-like people that were there fighting? So many people would feel that this was simply symbolic usage of language. It was literary usage. It was not real. The thing is that some Sahaba do describe later on, like we have descriptions of some companions saying, oh, we saw these angels come forward and fight. They were, cutting off the limbs of the people in front of us. They were slicing through the enemy ranks ahead of us. Now, they say, and some of them describe them in color, that they were kind of armor-cladded, this green-clad armor that they were wearing. And their horses were cladded in certain kind of armor and a green color, and their faces were masked. And some of the companions, the Prophet doesn't describe this, but some people have made these descriptions. Now it's interesting that, you see, on one hand, were these simply kind of narratological stories that these companions were telling other generations after them, as one would maybe at times anthropomorphize forces or determination. So was it just a literary thing like storytelling? Was that what it was? That many people may feel that. Other people have felt that this may have been in the midst of the battle. That's what it felt like to them. That they felt that, oh my God, were people, did I see something? And they felt they saw these things. So, whether those things were actually happening, but they felt it, and that's fine. So that's another interpretation. Now, I did come across recently a rare interpretation. Now, I'm not saying this interpretation carries any has to carry any truth, but it was an interesting one, and it was just intriguing. I mean, most likely it isn't true. I don't believe it's true, but I just found it interesting, and I haven't looked into it so deeply, but from what I came across, you see, some people have proposed that, and these are some kind of historians and non-Muslims, and people who specialize in kind of Persian history and things like this. They have proposed and hypothesized that Salman al-Farisi, radiallahu an, who was a Persian, and he'd come from he had a very illustrious kind of history, like somebody who initially was from the family of a Zoroastrian background, and that too from a kind of priestly lineage. and then he converts to Christianity, and then he becomes a very like a successful trader, and then he moves to Mecca. Now, the interesting thing is that to Medina, and embraces Islam. Now, the interesting thing is that these people feel that Salman al-Farsi was originally sent with a kind of military intelligence perspective from the Persian Empire. And because the Persian Empire had fallen into a bit of disarray as well, and it was quite insecure, and because he was from a family that were of highly priests, they were close to this, the Kisras and the rulers and things like this. So they feel that as a very intelligent person, they nominated him and sent him to kind of gather intelligence. And hopefully, this is what some of these historians have alleged, that Salman al-Farsi was to mobilize these southern forces, who were these Bedouin, and non-Bedouin, but these Arabs, who were a neglected people, because you had the Byzantine and you had the Persian Sassanid dynasties, and at the south you just had these Arabs who were a neglected, negligible force. So he was to mobilize them and use them to attack the Byzantines, eventually in time to come. This allegedly was some kind of conspiracy that some people have argued that Salman al-Farsi was originally sent with, and then he may have truly embraced Islam. They've not, from what I've heard, they've not argued that whether his embracing of Islam was fake. So they feel that maybe he truly embraced this message, but he always kept and he was close to the house of Karen. Now, sometimes just written in English as Karen, like the English name Karen, like of a woman. But here Karen was it was a man, not a woman, in Farsi, who were a particular, like a fiefdom. They had like a miniature kingdom, if you like, within the Persian Empire. And they were rivals with the current Sassanids, but they were still Persian at the end of the day, part of that kind of heritage. And now, this historian argues that there was an incident when Anushirwan, the famous leader of the Persians, is facing a Turkish kind of onslaught from the Turk, the original from up north Central Asia. And he's going to fight them, and he stands there, and they stand off, and he's losing. He's losing, he doesn't seem to be able to hold his ground. And then this army turns up that are not a part of his army, but they come, with this kind of green armored cladded armor, and the horses have this green cladded kind of armor, and they have their faces covered, and they fight off the Turk and save Anushirwan. Anushirwan is before Islam. He's probably about 2 generations before Islam. Now, you see, he's a famous Persian, one of the epic kind of leaders. So he then, at the end of the battle, once they've won, allegedly gets these people and manages to kind of encircle them, and he forces them to own up to who they are. And they are from the household. They then reveal that we are from the household, we are knights from the household of Karin. Now, these historians like Giorgiani, Jason Giorgiani and others have then argued that they feel Salman al-Farsi had sent message to the household of Karin, who then sent those same knights. Because this description is, he feels, and some other people like him feel, the description of the household, of the knights of the household of Karin. So they came and helped the Muslims beat the Battle of Badr. And then they just disappeared. So to Muslims it felt that maybe they were the angels, because they didn't expect anybody to be there. So when they saw these things, these horses in cladded armor, and the knights in green cladded armor and masks, and they associated this with maybe an angelic help, or because they were told there is angelic help as well, they assumed that this was the angels. That's an interesting kind of interpretation. Obviously, it requires a lot of exploration into the history, into looking into these armored knights of the House of Karen and what role they really did play in history and how powerful they were. I mean, even if it is true, it in no way is, it's not worrying or anything like this. It just, even if it be true, it simply just goes to show that, okay, that there was help. And some people, because they were told there was angelic help as a literary device, they assumed this help to have been the angelic one as an assumption, because otherwise it didn't make any sense. I mean, I'm not saying it's true. I don't, most likely it wasn't true, but I feel even if it was true, it's not in any way problematic. But I found it an interesting theory nonetheless. I did find it interesting. Cool. So I hope that's broadened some research horizons for some of you out there. So what else is going on, mi gente? Right, so what else is going on? Peoples. Share the questions, share the fitan and share the love, एक लफ्ज़ मोहब्बत का ये अदना फसाना है. That a word of love, this is, it's miniature kind of story, reduced story. एक लफ्ज़ मोहब्बत का ये अदना फसाना है. सिमटे तो दिले आशिक पहले तो ज़माना है. Right, that's he says if you completely wrap up this word, it embodies the heart of a lover, and if you allow it to unfold, it in and of itself is time. Allah. Right, so can everyone be their own mufti? You see, that's an interesting question. What does that mean? I would say to some extent, if you mean by it, to some extent, yes, there are certain things that will just disturb you as an individual, and you have the right to be disturbed, and you have the right to question, and you have the right to kind of not blindly follow. These things are all right, and I don't just mean they're all right, they are all correct. But you see, with that comes a responsibility of owning up to your limitations. You can't be a mufti in the true sense of the word, what an actual mufti is. A mufti is somebody who is trained and has a skill to not only understand Islamic law, but to legislate. He can himself, or she, can themselves legislate Islamic law. So just because you can in some ways, if I use that term, like if I agree to that sentence, can we all be our own mufti? To some extent, but not in the technical sense. Not in the sense that, a person should say, well, look, you know what, I'm just going to pick this book up or I don't accept this. And then if they say, well, why? Fine. You could say it disturbs me and I'm going to look into it. And I'll ask people or try to learn. But not to assume that all of a sudden you're an expert on Hadith, or you're an expert on Islamic law, or you're an expert on... You're not. I mean, it's not... These things, they don't just... They're not... just because I make this look easy. That's the difference. I just make it look easy. This stuff is a science, an absolute science. As they say, the man on the top of the hill didn't just land there. He had to climb his way up there. So people, it is hard work. It's fun, but it is hard work. It's not something, so although I do support people being critical and being very, and I encourage that, but I do at the same time kind of press on the issue that they must acknowledge their limitations. Like a person must acknowledge, look, I don't actually understand the Quran. You know, I must, like, just because you're following your critical doesn't mean that now you've become a master of all. I understand the Quran just as well, even though I don't understand. That's not true. So, yeah, so in that sense. Would you add more qualification on, in this day and age, would you add more qualifications on being a mufti? I'm not sure what that question means. Can you clarify the hadith about long nails? I'm not sure which hadith that is about long nails. But generally, I know that, look, Muslims, the Muslim culture generally does not like long nails, and the general description is one of hygiene. It's because, you see, obviously you have to understand that having longer nails exposes an individual to greater unhygienic circumstances. That's just a given. You know, that's, as they say in Arabic, tahsilul hasil. You know, it's just it's a given, people. You know, you can't argue with it. The question is, if you can maintain your hygiene, I don't think it's an issue. I think this issue was simply a hygienic ruling that the Prophet gave, where he generally spoke about hygiene, because you have to remember as well, hot environments where people are sweaty, where there's a scarcity of water, where things like this, and there isn't, remember, nails weren't, I mean, they definitely weren't in the Arab culture a symbol of fashion. So although today they are, I mean, they're a huge industry, but, and I think, you know, people with fake, well, I don't know, acrylic nails or different kind of fake nails that they wear, I don't think it's haram or anything like this to wear that. And the rulings of Islam are still relevant from a hygiene perspective. And that's what they always were. Is religious studies sufficient enough on being a mufti? Yeah, if you specialize, I mean, if you do the stuff, if you study it, you are it. You know, it's like if you study engineering, you're an engineer. It's not like if you study the alim course, the mufti course, if you do these things, you will be a mufti. I mean, hopefully, if you, as long as you don't entirely sleep during the lessons. But it's, a mufti is somebody who really specializes within Islamic fiqh and law and things like that. And it's an amazing, I mean, to be honest with you, I think I love the fact of being a mufti. It's one of my, it is my life's perhaps greatest achievement. I love it to bits. It's, this is why I proudly own it. You know, it's like I've said, and it's a title, it's a rank. It is a rank, you know, when you have to pull rank. It's like I've often said, people, I don't have a hierarchy. I am the hierarchy. Because it's, you know, a mufti is up there when it comes to Islamic knowledge and Islamic science. It doesn't mean they know, you know, everything, but usually you're more better trained than most kind of regular scholars and imams and shuyukh, and it's a rank above. Oh, the hierarchy. Right, so what are the rules regarding Sujud Al-tilawah? Wah, see, it's people like this that my heart bleeds for. See, in the midst of everything, what bothers brother Imran is, how are the rules for the Sajda Tilawah? Like when I'm reciting the Quran and I have to go into prostration. Oof. You know, Pakistanis have this, where they kind of go, overdo it with the actions and they go. We used to see a lot of it years ago in Pakistan. You see it here as well amongst like some yardy people, but they'll be like, you know, if they're going, oh, oof, they'll go like, right. So, Sajdatul-tilawah. Well, basically, there are certain prostrations in the Quran that are deemed kind of necessary, as in one should do them unless there's some preventative factor. Otherwise, if you read those verses of the Quran, you ought to do a prostration. And it's just a single, you know, you just go down into prostration, that's all. Right, so it's not, you know, so you'll just be standing and you'll just go into prostration. And these, obviously, you will, to do this, you ought to be upon wudu and you ought to be facing the Qibla. That's the general rules that most people agree upon. And how many, you know, sajdat, or how many of these sajdas are there in the Quran? People will generally disagree. It's usually to do with certain verses that instruct in the imperative tone. So it says, "Fasjudu lillah," you know, and prostrate to Allah. So, according to the Maliki madhab, there's 11. And the general popular version, the Hanafi school and others, is there's 14 in the Quran, and some have argued 15 even. But that's whichever, usually when you're reading along the standard editions of the Quran, I think they will generally go with 14. You'll see it there, it will just say next to it sajda. And you can just do, and they'll usually underline it, and you can just do a prostration. I mean, don't, it's not, you know, it's nothing to kind of really get lost in the technicalities of saying, well, is this a sajda, isn't it a sajda? Who cares? I mean, just do it, you know, if you can, that's all. But I don't believe it's a sin if you didn't. And there are many narrations to support that when people didn't. Like, so when, for example, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, during a khutbah, a speech, read one of the verses, and on one occasion he did get off and do sajda, but on other occasions he didn't. He just carried on. But yeah. And sajdatul shukr is a different form. Sajdatul shukr is a sajda, a prostration of gratitude. It can be done involuntarily, like as in, it's just a spontaneous action, like, thank you God for doing this, and you just go into sajda. A bit like maybe when some, you know, Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali or some of the, you know, those boxers, they won a particular match and they just fell into sujood, prostrating. Or you see sometimes some people who do sports do that. That would be described as a sajda to shukr. It's not really described in the sunnah. So the Prophet, it isn't really described that the Prophet actually did that ever. But I don't think it's problematic to do it. Okay, it's transmitted that some people say Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did it, some people say it's a weak narration. Either ways, and I know the Malikiya sometimes say, oh, you know, maybe we shouldn't do Sujood al-Shukr because the Prophet never taught it. But I would say if a person did it, it's not a big deal, you know, fine, it's just an expressive act. That's all. Cool. Wi-Fi here keeps going on and off. Okay. Alright. So, right, what's going... People, let's go to this question on Hamza al-Abbasi leaving the showbiz industry. What are our thoughts on that? Now, alright. What's life without a drink? Huh? A drink? I just said drink. I left it mutlaq. See, that's in the usuli term, the word mutlaq, when something is just left. What's life without a drink? I didn't say what kind of drink. Aha. Aha. And then you have the terminology al-muta'araf, which is that sometimes something إذا أطلق يرجع إلى المتعارف. If you let it go, it's understood as it is in the custom and convention. So you might say, well, we understand it like that. But then you could argue, but are conventions all universal? You thought I was sleeping through my usul classes. Right, so, nevertheless, people, so, as you know, we're going to come to the poet later on today, the great poet Imra al-Qays. He said in his famous statement, he said, Al-yawm khamr wa ghadan amr. He said, today it's alcohol, tomorrow it'll be business. So, sobriety is overrated, he says. Right, so, coming to this, Hamza al-Abbasi, I am actually very impressed with Hamza al-Abbasi after I watched his dialogical debate stroke discussion with Harris Sultan. To be honest, I had no expectation that he was that intelligent, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I expected him to be intelligent like general actors. You know, like the way Shah Rukh Khan is. I expect him to be kind of like Shah Rukh Khan intelligent. You know, like a bit witty, got a few dialogues, you know, read a few philosophies here and there, and just, you know, a bit of wisdoms on life, and that kind of intelligent. This guy is mind-blowing, this intelligent. I mean, he is genius level intelligent. I was wowed. I mean, he was talking about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, Einstein's relativity. He was speaking about genetics, DNA. He was speaking about, you know, the kind of theodicies, the cosmological arguments, the, you know, teleological arguments, the pros, the cons, the multiverse theory. This guy, I was wowed. Like, is that an actor? I mean, I just did not anticipate that level of academic profundity from an actor. I just did not anticipate that. And I was kind of wowed, like, whoa, this guy is next level genius. And I think he kind of came out, you know, on, if I can say, you know, on top in that discussion, really, with Harris Sultan, who's an ex-Muslim. So he's now, Hamza al-Abbasi has now announced that, look, I'm going to give up showbiz. I'm divorcing the showbiz industry, not with any bad blood, but I want to devote more time to religion and religious discourse. So, what are my thoughts on this? I think, first of all, I think that's awesome, because I think we need, in that part of the world, especially in Urdu, we need people with more courage to be able to voice things, because the divergence, the gap is getting, you know, it's just growing day by day between the middle classes and religion. And just people are becoming so disaffected by religion, and because it's only represented by the mullahs, you know, the mad mullahs. So people are starting to have a disdain and a hatred for it. So I really welcome this thought and these discussions. I hope, you know, they're going to be awesome, eye-opening. I would love, inshallah, I don't know if he'd ever accept. I'm not a big fish on his kind of level, but I would love to have him on one of my podcasts as they as they start running. Inshallah, I think it would be epic. But nevertheless, I think even if that doesn't happen, I really do think it's an amazing thing that he'll be doing. The only concern I have, and I'm pretty hopeful he won't go down that road, is I hope he doesn't become like a full-on mullah. Because I think the problem with that is you're no longer the bridge. You've just become one of the sides. So it's a bit like Junaid Jamshed, who was an icon, and you know, like I mean, people loved him. He was obviously a musician. He was a singer. He was very famous. You know, women idolized him. Men kind of deeply admired him. I mean, he was, I think, slightly. I mean, he was in my time, but as in him being an icon, I was probably a kid or just kind of growing up. But so I heard of him much later on. But the point was that when he became religious, there was a great sense of hope that he could have bridged a gap But really what happened is he just ended up becoming too, if I can use that word, too religious, as in nutcase religious. And he just became a weird kind of, like, I mean, he wasn't an extremist, but he became kind of like a mad mullah himself in a way. You know, like, this is haram, that's haram, women can't do this, women can't drive, women can't do this, they can't. And you think, well, you know, you could have done so much more for people if you just kept it kind of cool. Obviously, his choice, his life. I mean, he has passed away and died in a tragic accident. May Allah, you know, grant him a blissful afterlife. Ameen. But the point is that I'm hopeful, and I hope that Hamza Ali Abbasi doesn't go down that route, because that'd just be a waste. But that was my thoughts on that. Somebody had asked about, we've got Maulana Sheikh Anis Bayat in the house. Ahlan wa sahlan, Sheikh. Tasharrafna. Sheikh, people from the Midlands, from Leicester, I believe, if he's still there. Always feel free to reach out to Sheikh Anis Bayat. Very clued up in his field. Right, so somebody asked, what do I think about the Rabi Pirzada case? I've already answered about this, that I found it utterly kind of disturbing, disgusting that people would leak kind of nude videos. And really, you know, people blamed, I said this, that look, people blamed her, but I feel, look, like, why was she, so she made these videos, I don't know, maybe she made them for herself, maybe she made them to share with her partner, I don't know. But the point is, she made these videos where she's kind of, this, I mean, it's, they're all, the descriptions are all, you know, in the newspapers and things, where she's kind of masturbating, and naked, and, but the point is that, instead of criticizing her, as some people have chosen to do, I've said that, look, what she was doing was in her own private space. Like, who are you to judge somebody in their private space? Like, at the end of the day, she wasn't doing that in public. She wasn't doing it outside on the road. She was in her own kind of privacy. Now, one may argue, well, it was foolish to record yourself because these things can be leaked, and they clearly have in this incident. And I could agree with that argument. I would agree with that argument that, look, these things are incredibly foolish and dangerous to do because they can become life-wrecking for many people. But that said, I would argue against the condemnation factor, because I still feel that although you could argue that's foolish, but I don't feel you have a right to condemn her for what she did in her private space. Because at the end of the day, she's on her own in a private room. Even if she is recording herself, you know, it may be foolish, but why, you know, it's still her privacy. To what right do you have to control another person's private life? So you know, and I don't feel Islam does not give you the right to control someone's private life. So, yeah, so that's been my thing. And I've said that I feel that things like the internet are another attribute of kind of divinity. This sounds all shirky when I say that. And it's, you see, what I mean by that is that it's like how Yuval Harari is arguing in Homo Deus. You see, I do feel that humans, I kind of agree with him that we are transitioning from Homo sapiens, the wise humans, to Homo Deus, the divine humans, the God humans, godly humans. And I think when we say this, that becoming God or becoming gods, people, you see, if you're picturing God as in Islam or Abrahamic faith God, then obviously that's not what is meant in this thing, because that's not, human beings are not becoming that kind of God, but they're becoming the kind of gods like the mythological gods of the Greek tragedies, of Hindu mythology, of the ancient Roman kind of mythologies. If you picture those gods like Zeus and Apollo and having immense strength and being able to fly and being able to, if you picture, you know, like being able to send messages across, and being able to harness certain like wind power, or being able to, you will see that those kind of gods we are becoming. I mean, we have already in many ways become like that. We have, we have immense powers now, and this for a civilization before us would just be magical divinity. Like, they could never understand these things. That how can I sit here now and have this omnipresence throughout the globe potentially? How could I do that? How could in real time you hear my voices, my voices? Those are the other voices in my head, and see me. Is that not a sense like the gods of old, like Indra and these gods? So I feel in some ways, and the internet is one of those attributes, the ability for an infinite source of information, the ability to never forget, which is not human, So you put something like one of these videos on the internet to shame someone, and the internet never forgets. And do we really deserve having the power to destroy somebody's life like that? I don't feel we do. I would argue that we do not have the right to destroy anybody's life like that. So these are my thoughts on that. I have said that before. Right, let's take a few live questions, and then we'll get back to some of these criminals of Islam. I haven't watched or read that, if that's a book. I haven't read that. I'll try and look into the summary. Let me see. Let me just go to... Right, peoples. What is going on? I'm just trying to go to the questions. Right. What are your thoughts on DMT? Sajid Khan, a man who has his priorities in place. I think DMT is not haram, and I think it's awesome. I would personally think it is awesome. I do agree that I think it's a kind of... it's maybe a gateway to... you see, because I use the word spiritual in a different sense to what people use it like. So to me, spiritual is more about consciousness, because I see the ruh as consciousness. So to me, things like DMT may be the hidden cheats in this world, a gateway into the realm of consciousness. I'm very intrigued by these things. I don't think they're haram, and I find it utterly disappointing that certain countries, that many countries, they deem it to be illegal. I find that ridiculous. I've been to certain lectures by professors and experts in DMT who've shown the statistics. There's never been a single death by things like DMT, and the body has natural receptors for DMT. So it must. Isn't that intriguing? That why have we got so many natural receptors for DMT? Where are we getting our DMT from? So that's just so intriguing. I find it that so I think that the British government needs to review its drug policy. How can things like alcohol, which cause deaths, ridiculous amount of deaths on an annual basis, you've got reports like that deemed so toxic, toxicology reports and things like this, and then you've got something like DMT, which really is a entheogen. It's not a recreational drug, it's an entheogen. It's something that is to connect people with God. But once again, I don't feel it's for everybody. So I don't advocate that everybody should take it, but I feel that, I definitely don't feel it's haram, but I do understand that it could be overwhelming for people to make that connection with the realm of consciousness like that. Mushrooms, exactly the same thing. I don't feel psilocybin is the psychoactive ingredient in mushrooms. Psilocybin is not haram. None of these drugs, you see, psychoactive drugs like that are not a matter of haram. They may be a matter of legality, and they may be a matter of sensibility, health sensibilities, and how people take them, but I don't believe them to be haram.
Somebody's posted a question. Somebody said Mufti wearing a thobe is a sign of the Day of Judgment. No, this is for my Mufti Masala at the end, where I'm going to... This is when I'm going to express why I dabble in the dark arts. But that's going to come later on. What about kava? 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 What is kava? We use kava to mean just it's like basically just tea without milk, really, and it's seen sometimes with a few other little herbs in there, just to usually used as medicine. That's what we call kava. Right, who were the Ikhwaan al-safa? Ikhwaan al-safa, you know, someday I've got a bunch of the articles. Someday I'll go over that, some of their things, and they were an intriguing anonymous group that did on many levels try to echo the voice of reason, but I'm not. They may have come up with other weird things as well. But I'll bring out their books and I'll go over some of their things as well, and then maybe try and summarize it. You look like the Grim Reaper. Hell yeah, that's the point. Because we're gonna speak about that a little later on. You don't think psychedelics are intoxicants? Psychedelics are not intoxicants. Psychoactive drugs are not intoxicating. They may be hallucinogenic, some of them. And you see, this is another thing. People don't really study psychology. They don't really study the brain. They don't understand how drugs are organized and categorized and things like this. But it's not an intoxicant, right? But it is, and intoxicants are usually depressants. It is psychoactive. It's a psychoactive drug. That means it may have hallucinogenic properties. Most likely does. That's the nature of psychoactive drugs. But the question of, you see, hallucinogenic properties, is that a hallucination, or is it a peep into the realm of consciousness? You see, what's to say that it's not a realm that we have access to? See, many people like Huxley and other people had argued that the neofrontal cortex, you know, the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is actually which is the CEO of the brain, is actually a consciousness reductionist valve. So it cuts off, narrows the amount of consciousness that can get into the brain, and the brain is actually like a receiving device of consciousness. And see, because studies have shown when people are on DMT and when they're on psilocybin, mushrooms, and even to some extent LSD, that they've shown that what happens is contrary to what neuroscientists anticipated. Activity seems to shut off and be incredibly reduced in the neofrontal cortex, which is really fascinating. So what is going on then? Why is this person getting all this experience by the neofrontal cortex reducing activity? So I am inclined to that view that consciousness is non-local and we are kind of like receiving devices. So I do feel that, and I feel that that is the concept of the ruah. Right, so yeah, that's my and hence there's a kind of like a social network of consciousness, and the hadith that al-arwahu junudun mujannada, and that the arwah are in essence like banded, grouped together kind of formations. فَمَا تَعَارَفَ مِنْهَا اخْتَلَفَتْ وَمَا تَنَاكَرَ مِنْهَا اخْتَلَفَتْ. And that which kind of gels well, the people gel well. And that which doesn't, they repel one another. I just find it very fascinating, that's all. Right, Mufti, is it wrong to use the term wahabi? Wahabi happens to be one of the names of Allah. Abbe yaar, Wahhabis are not Allah. I don't know. Right, heavy maamla ho gaya. That hadith came to mind, and so it does. Right, so Wahhabi, is it derogatory to use the term Wahhabi? I mean, it might be derogatory to the people that you call Wahhabis, but it's not wrong in Islam to say the word Wahhabi, because Wahhab is also a name of Allah. But that's not what's meant here by any sense, and people understand that. See, Wahhabi is in reference to Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And the sorry thing is that, you see, he's the one who did all the, we have this word, put. It's in our lingo. When somebody does some garbar, when they kind of do a bit of fitna fasad, they kind of mess things up. So we call that put. So this guy, he does all this put, so to speak, and people don't kind of give rag at him. They don't kind of have a go at him. I mean, they do, but the name that embodies that disaster of what he did is his dad. His dad gets it for free. Because his name was Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. That's his dad's name. So so people going, Wahhabis, Wahhabis. I mean, don't get me wrong, I will say it as well at times, but in essence, that's his dad. He's getting it for free, I guess. But people mean by him. So they mean the movement, the Wahhabi movement and things like this. It's not wrong Islamically, but obviously it can be provocative. And I mean, people use it, I get it. I use it at times, so it's not a... if you can see this, you like this Facebook playing up, I've got no idea what you're saying. Right, so... what is going on, mi gente? Right, shall we take a... Alright. Salam, bro. Mufti Abu Layth. Nazia Shah goes, salam, bro. What's up, bro? Do you do live talks? Yeah, this is a live talk right now. I'm doing it right now. So, right. Muhammad Mahdi says, Salam Mufti, just to say the stuff you mention in your Monday nights has had many re-evaluating their faith. I listened to you talk about the return of Jesus, and listening to your opinion has made me question my whole understanding of the topic, including the fact about you saying that the Prophet's hadith about the 10 major signs were never mentioned. It's not, yeah, and really, in all honesty, this, all the ashrat al-sa'a and everything, most of these hadith are kind of made up. They may have been made up with good intentions, and this is why, one of the famous statements of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, that he said, like, 3 things, tafasir, maghazi, and ashrat, these things have no basis to them. That much of the tafsir you receive from, like, let's say if they're saying the Prophet gave tafsir of this, or the companions, most of it is made up. As are most of the battles descriptions, most of them. I mean, maybe the underlying theme, but there's so much detail in some of the books. It's usually just made up, or it's kind of just because it's a story that somebody's kind of spun, and then somebody else has added to it, and somebody else has added to it, and they've tried to dramatize it, and the same thing about Asharat, the end of time. So all these kind of apocalyptic, fear-mongering kind of predictions and prophecies are usually made up. That's the nature of religion with a capital R. It does a lot of that. Somebody said, need to read the book Apocalypse in Islam by Jean-Pierre Fouy. Okay, I've not read that, but I will look into it. Is the Friday prayer in the mosque also an obligation in a country that's not Islamic? I believe that the Friday prayer is good. It's good to go to if you can. I don't believe it's an absolute obligation to attend to, especially in this day and age, in this part of the world. I believe it's a good thing that, it's good that some people are going, and that it's one of those things that a portion of the community ought to do. That's my belief. I don't believe it's an absolute obligation, and hence many people sometimes did boycott, or they just didn't go to Jummah, like Imam Malik. He abandoned going to the mosque for the last 25 years of his life. He didn't used to pray in the mosque. And obviously he never used to pray Jummah either. It'd be rather silly if he just turned up for Jummah and didn't turn up for the other prayers. So he wasn't so I don't believe that he was sinful or anything like this, and I don't believe it's an obligation, but I believe it's strongly encouraged. I do accept that. But I do feel that Jummah did have to it, and still does in some ways, an underlying political theme and motif that is inseparable from Jummah. People, sometimes how the words come to me even astonish me. Why didn't the Prophet compile the Quran in its current form prior to his death? Because that was his life's purpose. Maj Salim asks. Well, I wasn't there. Why didn't the Prophet compile the Quran as a book, you mean? Good question. The Prophet didn't compile it as a book. Now, why didn't he compile it as a book? You see, in one way, one could argue, like I'm sure some people here may be arguing, or in other places, that that's a shortcoming. Some people may try to say, oh, that's a shortcoming of the Prophet or the shortcoming of the message of Islam. Okay. The other way to look at it is, you see, in a world where nature dictates that survival is only by the fittest, in a world like that, a message that comes to you so powerfully driven will bring with it some challenges that unless you rise to those challenges, then you are not worthy to transmit that message. The companions of the Prophet were left with that challenge. Some have said the Quran implicitly directed them to that trajectory by saying, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, that book, لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ, that there is no doubt in it. هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, it is a guidance. That this, in the time of Abu Bakr, as the challenge manifested itself and intensified, the companions were met with some confusion about what to do, but they rose to the challenge. And had they not, the message may have dissipated, it may have withered away. And in some ways, had they not rose to it, one may argue, are such people who didn't meet the challenges worthy to transmit such a powerful message? But they obviously proved they were. So in many ways, I can understand the question as a critique. I get that look, the Prophet did not compile a book, but he left it in the hands of people in whom he saw competence and potential, and it was then up to them, you see, because this message was not for the Prophet to do everything with it, because it was not a message just for him, it was a message for mankind. If mankind were to fail it, then they were to fail it anyway. So in some ways I do see this, I see this criticism, I get it, but I also can see the strength in the history that we have. It's an undeniable history that the companions did document it, and the Quran was transmitted. They may argue whether, there was this variation, there was this, that, true, but it was successfully overall transmitted. So yeah, if that's of any help, Allahu A'lam. Farhan Zubairi, alright, Mufti Farhan Zubairi, ahlan wa sahlan, from the US, people, you're doing it. Prophet wrote Quran. Shia believe the Prophet wrote Quranally. Quran written by Ali. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I mean, the Shia do disagree on certain things. I don't think by and large they disagree on the Quran today. And the Shia amongst themselves are very divided as well. They're not a monolith body, so it's not, so some of them may have said things that, there were other portions of the Quran. But to be honest with you, some Sunnis have said stuff like that as well. If you read the Sunni, I've always argued against that. What's in those hadith in Sahih Bukhari, and that the Quran used to have more parts that disappeared, and like the hadith, which is a Sunni hadith, that Aisha saying, oh, that an animal ate a portion of the Quran, and things like this. And I feel these things were always nonsense, and I felt that they're always blasphemous to the Prophet, transmitting these things. And there's a hadith that the Prophet saying, oh, he forgot portions of the Quran, but thank God so-and-so reminded him. Astaghfirullah. That is the epitome of blasphemy. And other Sunni scholars, they said this is as stupid and dumb as it gets to say things. Reading what Maturidi had to say in his tafsir about this stuff, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he says that this is ridiculous to believe stuff like this. He says, because if you're saying that the Prophet forgot portions of the Quran, there and then, if somebody had asked him about that verse, he wouldn't have known about it, which would show a failure and a failing in prophethood. So I find these things ridiculous. But, this ties into a more interesting question, and that is that we lack a critical review and a critical evaluation of our own tradition. This is the problem, people. Honestly, if we as Muslims had just got on with it and reviewed our own tradition, but we haven't, and then we only review it once it's given to us it's handed to us. We're kind of smacked in the face with it by Orientalists or Islam revisionists or ex-Muslims or atheists. And then we're like, what do we do? What do we do? Well, that's what you get for not reviewing your own tradition and being critical. You need to review it yourself. I'm not saying you guys individually, but we as a Muslim collective, as Muslim scholarship, we have a burden of responsibility to review and evaluate our own tradition. And yes, there have been some scholars throughout history that have been inclined that way. They have reviewed things, people like Ibn Hazm, other people who had a very critical voice, Shawkani and San'ani and people like this. But by and large, this tradition has been of kind of confessionalism. It's just kind of just taken it and just pass it along. And then you get smacked in the face with it and you're like, ooh. Yeah, so, yeah. That's the thing. So then we're just awaiting another tragedy to befall us, really. मैं साजिशों में गिरा एक यतीम शहजादा, कोई छुपा हुआ खंजर मेरी तलाश में. Allah, Allah, Allah. He says that he says an orphan prince who has become engulfed by conspiracies against him, that a hidden dagger somewhere is silently seeking him out. Allah, Allah. That मैं साजिशों में गिरा एक यतीम शहजादा, कोई छुपा हुआ खंजर मेरी तलाश में. Very powerful people. So, right, what's your view on boxing? I've answered this before. Boxing is permissible. There's nothing. Obviously, any of these sports are sports. They have dangers, and I'm not saying I advocate that. But I do advocate people learning boxing, but I don't advocate necessarily taking it up as a sport, as a kind of profession. But people who are cut out for it, why not? I mean, if that's their thing, they know the risks and they do it. Yeah. Wendy Khan, last and final messenger, you are right. I'm not sure. Early post-prophetic history and the early Muslim community political issues. Yeah. Isn't it true that some Jew started the Shia sect? Jack Bauer saying, if I found the 5 how to perform ones that need could be performed like Hajj, Salah and so on. Would you agree with my analysis and study of the Quran if I found the 5 pillars and how to perform? I'm not sure what Jawad is trying to ask me here. Right, so right now this thing about I'm not sure what the question is. There's a few questions going on, but people are talking about them. They're not. I don't know what the actual question is. Right. So this thing about did a Jewish person, Abdullah ibn Saba, or these kind of people, or did they invent Shia, the Shia sect? I don't. In all honesty, I don't. I think that's just a Sunni hype that like a Jewish person invented. That's just like a typical Muslim kind of response, isn't it? Blame it on the Jews. I do feel that the early people in the early generations teach us a spell to control fear. I do believe that the early when this Shia thing kind of was created, it originally just began as kind of a taking side. It wasn't a theological thing, it was just a taking sides. So the Shia to Ali were the people who took sides with Ali radiallahu an, and the other people who took sides, let's say, with the other people. And it wasn't just Muawiyah radiallahu an. And I think this is sometimes what I strongly disagree with on the Shia, that they only present it as an Ali versus Muawiyah, when really there were many companions that Ali was against, you know, or you know, and this whole, including Zubayr and Talha and Aisha and all these other great companions were on that side. So yeah, so this thing of, so people who took sides, so those who parted with Ali became known as Shia to Ali. It's only later on that this became a theological kind of belief structure. And yes, I do believe that many people who joined the Shia to Ali exploited the vulnerability of the situation. So they may not have been sincere about Ali radiallahu anh, but they just realized this is a great opportunity to, you know, to get what we need and to join this rift and this faction. And I do believe that. That's, you know, that there were many people that did exploit that, as many humans would. You know, if you saw an opening, you'd go for it. Simple as that. But I'm not kind of saying that the whole Shia thing was a conspiracy. I think it was, in all honesty, it was a human problem. You know, it's like with anything, isn't it? That after the leader passes, it falls into disarray. And Islam in some ways was no different, I guess. That the huge mess that was created after the passing of the Prophet, and I'm not saying created intentionally, but that manifested. And it was just because people were humans. And just that's the issue, human, all too human. And they just, you know, the fighting, the wars. And it's interesting that certain scholars have argued that, you know, we have, in Islam, we have this history of ancient Arabia, al-Jahiliyyah, Ayyam al-Jahiliyyah, what they call Ayyam al-Arab, the days of the Arab. And the days of the Arabs were simply wars, like the, you know, Harb al-Basus and Harb al-Bu'ath and Harb al-Fujar and all these kind of things. Now, these things were really just like these long, like let's say the 40-year war and this war and that war. Now, although many wars did happen, but some scholars have argued, like Taha Hussein, that that this was really a back projection of Muslims, that they manufactured or exaggerated many of those stories just to kind of be able to outshine them with Islam. So they kind of exaggerated, like what they tried to do was exaggerate the darkness to amplify the light. You understand? So some scholars have argued, and to some extent I think Taha Hussein may have a point, that historians may have done that. This isn't Islam doing this. This is, remember, 200 years after the Prophet, that people may have done things like that, that amplified, they may have kind of exaggerated in how the horrific fighting of the Arabs and so on, just to kind of demonstrate that, oh, when Islam, and also to kind of acquiesce the infighting of the Muslims that happened after the Prophet, to kind of take away from that, detract it, or to kind of eclipse it. Because if we say, well, look, all this fighting happened and thousands of people died, and then you say, well, you know, pre-Islam, so many, 40 years they fought in, you know, Harb al-Basus, and you're thinking, whoa, that's crazy, and so all of a sudden this looks very small. So I think that there's some truth, some bitter truth to maybe what Sheikh Taha Hussein was saying. Right, so somebody asked Trovosky, why was Imam Ahmad's madhab not accepted by Imam Tabarani? It's not Imam Tabarani, it's Imam Tabari. Tabarani is another scholar. Abul Qasim al-Tabarani is a famous muhaddith who has his ma'ajim, his books on hadith. He has the Ma'ajim al-Saghir, wal-Awsat, wal-Kabir, and many other books as well on the practices of a day and night, the Ruwat, whose name is Ata, and several other kind of books he has that are in print now. But the Abu Ja'far al-Tabari, who passes away in 311 Hijri, Puttar, you think I don't still got it? Even when I'm on a mini break from the gym, chilling at home, I still got it, you know. So Abu Ja'far al-Tabari, who passes away in 311 Hijri, he was very opposed to the kind of the madhab of Imam Ahmad. I don't think he was opposed to Imam Ahmad as much as his followers, because he doesn't really meet Imam Ahmad at all. He's after Imam Ahmad. Whether he met him briefly, I don't think so. But even if he did, it's mainly his clashes with the followers of Imam Ahmad. And he kind of says to them, I don't think Imam Ahmad really had a madhab. He was just a scholar of hadith that had some opinions. You guys are bigging him up too much. In some ways, I kind of feel some truth to that statement. I think the Hanbalis were just accept, you know, the Hanbali madhab is just a kind of pity madhab, that the other madhabs never even, for several hundred of years, never even acknowledged them. And then they're just like, yeah, they're like the token guy, you know? You know, like they're like, yeah, you know, equal opportunities, equal ops. They're like, I know, you know, the special needs group, let them in as well. And then the Hanbalis are like, we're in this group, There have been one, two kind of Don Hanbalis I've been impressed with over the time, like Ibn Aqil and a few others, Ibn al-Jawzi, and Ibn Qudama has had a lot of talent as well, but really, by and large, most of them have just been really weird. Weird doesn't even cut it. They've been like the token convert, yeah. It's like, he's alright. You know, we do have great sympathy. Look, we've got the Hanbalis with us. We're not bad people. We let the Hanbalis be part of Ahl Sunnah as well. Your Mazari's in the house. Your Mazari. doing it. People, let's take a look at this this Quran discussion. Was the Quran plagiarized? So this is the discussion, yeah. Now, what the argument is, let me bring you up to speed with the argument. It is that people are claiming, or this is especially from the video of Ismail Abu Adam, his channel Don't Convert to Islam, where he highlights that the Quran was
plagiarized by the poem, as in the prophets sneakingly stole poetry from some lines from Imra al-Qays, the epic poet pre-Islam, and the prophet then posed these off as the Quran, some verses, and this is how the prophet, so the Quran is plagiarized. Now, why has he made this claim? So, why has he made this claim? Because he feels that there was some claims to. It's not it is a manuscript, but it's not a manuscript of Imra al-Qays, but it's a manuscript of a poem that is attributed much later, as in centuries later after Imra al-Qays, that's attributed to him, that has some lines in there, like some of the poems. There's a verse of the Quran, اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر, that the hour has been brought near and the moon has been cleft asunder. Now this اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر is claimed to have been in one of the poems of Imra al-Qays. In the more popular version, and these are not necessarily authentic, but I'm going to get to that. But in the more popular version, it's danat as-sa'a, that the sa'a has drawn close. Dana is another word from where you get the word dunya, and iqtarabat as-sa'a. So danat as-sa'a wa inshaqa al-qamar. So right, so they're saying that did the Prophet steal this from Imra al-Qays? Right, the answer first of all is this is totally absurd. Okay, and I'll explain why. And I'll go into a bit on who Imra al-Qays actually was. First of all, if the Prophet had been stealing the Quran from Imra al-Qays, let's say, Imra al-Qays, by the way, was dead way before the Prophet. But what we're trying to say is the Prophet somehow got hold of some of his poems and he tries to sell them off as verses of the Quran. You see, Imra al-Qays was not an unknown person. He was a legend to the Arabs. This would never have worked. So let me first of all explain who Imra al-Qays is, and who has brought up this debate. So this, I know Ismail is speaking about it, but he hasn't obviously invented this discussion. This discussion was brought up during the British Raj. Okay, the British Raj of India. There's a famous scholar of Orientalist of the name Sir Charles Lyell, who was a civil servant in the British Raj. Now, he was an alleged expert on Arabic. He entertains this discussion, but he's seen as the expert who actually disowns this claim. It is brought to him by William Tisdale. Now, Tisdale is really this person who is meant to be very talented. He knew many languages. He knew Arabic. He knew things like Persian, Hindustani, Punjabi. He actually wrote out the grammar for things like Gujarati, and he tried to codify certain languages like Punjabi, Persian. He was an expert on Persian, and he was based in Persia. He was an Orientalist, right? So now what happens is, right, so during his time he comes across a manuscript that states that, oh, this is an old poem of Imra al-Qays. So when he looks into it, he finds that, okay, sorry, I was just seeing this message. Right, so when he looks into this message, he realizes that, oh, this is, wow, these verses look very similar to some verses of the Quran.
he then starts saying, well, okay, this could mean that the Prophet stole this from this famous poet Imra al-Qays. This is where the argument originates. He presents it to this scholar Lyle, who takes a look at it and eventually concludes that no, the style doesn't match up, and this doesn't seem to be an authentic poem or a line from Imra al-Qays. That's the kind of gist of it. This argument was presented around the early 1900s, 1910, 1920, approaching that kind of time, really. So it's not something which is a new argument in that case, okay. So who was... Sorry, I'm just trying to... So, who was Imra al-Qays? Right, Imra al-Qays is one of the major celebrated poets in Arabia. He comes from this tribe of Kinda. Now, Kinda were an immigrant, and this is why you're going to understand why this is so important. Kinda, a few hundred years, you've got to backtrack. So first of all, pre-Islam, we're going to go back a couple of centuries. You're talking like 300 years before Islam. A group of migrants from southern Arabia, they migrate towards central kind of Arabia, central Arabian peninsula, around places like Najd and these kind of places. These people go on to become known as Kinda. They were a migrant kind of a community that set up there. Then they establish a kingdom. They eventually become very powerful. Okay, Imra al-Qays's grandfather, Al-Harith, and by the way, there's many Imra al-Qays simply means the servant, Imra, like the man of Qays, who was a god. And there were many people, many ancient Arabs before Imra al-Qays with the same name who are very popular. So not to be confused with those Imra al-Qays. Now, his grandfather, the poet's grandfather, was very well known because he conquered a huge kingdom, if you like. He set up the Kinda kingdom, and he conquered parts of... I've spoken in the past about the northern Arabs in their capital, cultural capital, Hira, and this is where the famous Lakhmid dynasties were, and they were under a protectorate state of the Sassanid Persian Empire. Now, Harith, who's the grandfather of the poet, captures Hira for a few years, and you can imagine his whole kind of influence is massive. They stabilize their central place, which is places like Najd and Yamama and these places, and what they do is they make this a safe passage. So, because a lot of tribes would fight and things like this, so they make a safe passage for caravans and things like this. So they are very well known, the tribe of Kinda. They're not like unknown in any chance, in any kind of circumstance. Now, after Harith passes away, he has like 5 sons and he sets them about on different kingdoms. So one of these guys, his name is Hujjar. He's the father of the poet, who they're saying that the Prophet plagiarized. This guy, Hujjar, once again, has an established kingdom close to Hijaz. Parallel, you've got Najd and Yamama and these major Arab tribes like Ghatfan and Bani Asad and these kind of people who he is in charge of. He's not just a nobody, and they were at one point started to conquer many other territories, and they were seen as like a brutal force, to the extent that the Prophet has said, allegedly, that the Prophet said, it's attributed to the Prophet, that he said, when Islam came, things changed, otherwise Kinda would have swallowed up the entire Arabs. Like, that's how, because they started to expand. They were also, at one point, one of the few tribes that intended to unite all of the Arab factions. So have a confederate kind of state. So the grandfather of Imra al-Qays attempted that with some success. And Imra al-Qays arguably attempted to unify a lot of the different Arab factions. In his time, he was one of the few sons, and he was a useless, kind of like a vagabond. He was somebody that was a bit like, he was just a wanderer. He was drunk often, loved drinking, loved women, Much of the world hasn't changed there, as you can see. So his poetry is full of that, and he didn't have this kind of he was like a wandering person. He wasn't a mystic, but he was like a lost cause, a rebel without a cause. He had this group which were known as the Su'luk. They became like almost like tribe-like. They were a community of people from lost causes from different tribes that came together, and they were like his gang. So they would often just travel about. Obviously, they got into fights, they got into things. They would just drink. He would just always, he was into women, and he was really known for this. His father, at one point, Hujar, who was like an established mighty king, he gets into some battle, takes over some people, and then he's trying to punish them or something, and then he decides to forgive them. They, seizing the opportunity, kill him. And it's interesting actually, because they decide to kill him as an act of rebellion, whilst incited by a kahin, somebody can speak tongues and do this kind of, he feels he's kind of dabbles in the dark arts, and so they get inspired, and then they kill his father. As he's dying, he argued, this is what it's claimed, he kind of sends a message to Imra al-Qays, his son, that you must avenge my death. And he's like the useless son. It's a proper Bollywood movie. So the messenger comes to him, and he is drinking alcohol. And he's playing a game of, they say nard, which is backgammon or something like this, or it may have been similar. He's playing this game of dice, and he's drinking alcohol, and somebody comes and tells him your father has been killed, and before he died, he put it on you to avenge his death. So he says his famous statement, Imra al-Qays. He says, ضيعني أبي صغيرا وحملني دمه كبيرا. He says that my father wasted me as a child. Like, he ignored me, neglected me. I was never of importance to him. And when he died, he ruined me further by kind of burdening me with vengeance for his blood. So then he says that, he says that today is not a day for sobriety. Where he says, al-yawm khamar, that today is a day for alcohol. وَغَدًا أَمَرْ, and tomorrow we will see to this affair. Allah! Legends are in their own kind. Now, Imra al-Qays then gathers his vagabond kind of gang, his Su'luk, who are like disaffected tribal members, and he tries to kind of raise an army, of a confederate army from different tribes to avenge his father's death against this tribe, who then have protection from like the Sassanids and so on, and there's this whole thing, and he does actually rise to a scale where he is it's claimed he's invited by Justinian, the emperor, but although he doesn't actually get to meet him, he dies en route, but he rises to from a complete lost cause to that status where he almost is successful in building a confederate army of varying tribe factions to unite in a cause. It's actually a very epic tale. You can follow it through in much more detail in your own time, but this is celebrated as one of the most powerful attempts, although it was it wasn't fruitful. It was an abortive attempt. It was unsuccessful, but it was celebrated as a major attempt, only then to be successfully carried out under the banner of Islam, that the varying faction tribes of Arabia united. So it's interesting that some people have argued that, this was a like a mission of many, a vision of many people to unify the different tribes, varying factions. But if this person, Imra al-Qays, who is seen as an epic, a hero, whose tribe are so powerful, who Umar praises his poetry, saying that he dug into the spring of poetry and made words flow. These are the words of Umar regarding Imra al-Qays. And they argue that the Prophet said, I don't think it's authentic, but they say that the Prophet said he would be carrying the flag, leading all poets behind him, meaning that this is how he is rated as a poet. If the Prophet was to plagiarize his work, which by the way is not in his diwan, so this is the diwan of Imra al-Qays. This is his poetry that is arguably compiled. Those lines are not in this, but they're saying that if it was a separate thing that the Prophet got hold of and he managed to pull it off, they would never have let him. He would have been caught out. The Prophet would have been caught out like that. Kinda were not just a nobody. They were a force to be reckoned with. You know, they were not. They were huge, and they had sway and power. They weren't just like, you couldn't just and then take such a celebrity and you happen to know something which other people don't, and you'd compromise an entire message by trying to steal a few lines and risk being caught out. So that's absolute nonsense. It makes no sense that the Prophet would have been able to do something like this so surreptitiously, so kind of, you know, inconspicuously, in a way, you know, it just would not have happened. Okay. So yeah, now the other thing is, if these lines were true, now they're not actually true, because even the Orientalist scholars like Lyle and these other people themselves conclude that, look, we don't, you know, upon further study of this, it's not actually, this does not look like the lines of Imra al-Qays, because he was somebody who was known to be a worshipper. He wasn't a devout worshipper, but he worshipped idols. He was not, and this speaks of the final day and day of judgment, and he didn't believe in things like this. So these poems wouldn't even make sense. The other thing is the metric scale is problematic. And even if somebody was to argue, just by saying certain words overlap, they will always overlap in language. I'm just saying. Not that this is a strong point, but you will always get certain words that overlap. Like, because if I speak something in English, and then there's so many verses in the Quran with words, now you're going to get a small, you know, one shaq al-qamar, a small overlap if people share a similar kind of psychosocial land space. So I just wanted to highlight that. The other thing that I want to conclude with, and I know many people may not agree with this, but I do believe this to be true, is that, you see, a lot of Jahili poetry, like, you know, this is Imra al-Qays, people. By the way, these are his kind of, he has the amazing, you know, his famous poem, قِفَا نَبْكِي بِذِكْرَى حَبِيبٍ وَمَنْزِلِ بِسِقْتِ اللِّوَى بَيْنَ الدَّخُولِ فَحَوْمًا. That this, you know, he's telling his two companions to stop and cry about this, you know, this woman he loved who's kind of left. She used to live at this place, and it's an amazing poem, but he doesn't, obviously, it's not, he is somebody that you will, you know, if you start reading him, you'll see he'll speak about so many, you know, different women. Look, كَدَعْبَكِ مِنْ الْحُوَيْرِثِ قَبْلَهَا, you know, like al-Huwayrith before her, وَجَارَتَهَا الرَّبَابِ بِمَأْسَلِ, and her neighbor, the other woman, al-Rabab. Hero, this guy, hero. You know, he says, he has this poem that Ala Rubba Yawmin, this is part of his famous Mu'allaqa. Ala Rubba Yawmin laka min hunna salihin, wala siyama yawman bidarati juljuli. Allah. He says, but how many days have you had that were awesome with these different women? He's addressing himself, and he says, especially the day at Daratu Juljuli. Jul. You know, in our language, Jul means vamos. Let's go. Right, but he's talking about especially at the place where he وَيَوْمَ عَقَرْتُ لِلْعَذَارَ مَطِيَّتِي فَيَا عَجَبًا مِنْ كُورِهَا الْمُتَحَمَّلِ. Basically, there was this place where he says these women were, and he describes them as these, young virgin women. He says that they were at this place and they're kind of bathing at in some lake or something, and they get stranded, and so he turns up as you do. He just happens to know where the place is, and he turns up, and then because they're stranded, they need obviously food and they're starving. So what he does is look at Vala, he says, hungry. Takes out his sword, sacrifices his camel. A real man, you know. So right. So he sacrifices his camel and he feeds it to them, and he says, "But what a day that was, huh?" He says, "I win over many of them." He says, وَيَوْمَ دَخَلْتُ الْخِدْرَ خِدْرَ عُنَيْزَةٍ. Now he's speaking about another one, Unayza. He says, but the day I entered the little, like the curtained little room. But he's speaking about, especially on top of the camel, what they would ride in, especially women. They'd have like a little veiled kind of what they could sit in. And he says, وَيَوْمَ دَخَلْتُ الْخِدْرَ خِدْرَ عُنَيْزَةٍ فَقَالَتْ لَكَ الْوَيْلَاتُ إِنَّكَ مُرْجِلِي. And she says that, what are you doing? You're going to make this camel, you're going to make us fool? And he says, تَقُولُ وَقَدْ مَالَ الْغَبِيطُ بِنَا مَعًا أَقَرْتَ بَعِيرِي يَمْرَ الْقَيْسِ فَانْزِلِي. And she said that, what are you doing? You're going to wreck my camel. It's like, for the love of God, she says, يَمْرَ الْقَيْسِ, get off. And he says, فَقُلْتُ لَهَا سِيرِي وَأَرْخِي سِمَامَهُ وَلَا تُبْعِدِينِي مِنْ جَنَاكِ الْمُعَلَّلِ. He said, I said to her, let the reins of the camel go, and you come near, my dear. He said, why are you distancing me from this sweetened harvest? Check this out. And he says, فَمِثْلُكِ حُبْلَى قَدْ تَرَقْتُ وَمُرْضِعٍ. He says, and how many pregnant women like you and nursing, like women who are suckling their young still, like they've got a baby, how many pregnant women like you and suckling women have I, he says, تَرَقْتُ, have I had sex with? فَأَلْهَيْتُهَا أَنْ ذِي تَمَاعِمَ مُحْوِلِي. And to the extent that she completely forgot about her young. This is why he was called the Malik al-Dalil, the kind of libertine, lost king, the one who was completely... but this is his famous poem, by the way, which people have argued was stuck on the Kaaba. I think that's a myth, but anyway, they've argued that. And he says, it's interesting, and about a different one, Fatima. أفاطمة مهلا بعد هذا التدلل وإن كنت قد عزمعت صرمي فأجملي. He says that, if he says, Fatima, chill, says, unless you've made up your mind, in that case, leave with, he goes, why are you arguing? Just leave. And it's amazing, his whole, and this is a very epic line of his, that وَمَا ذَرَفَتْ عَيْنَاكِ إِلَّا لِتَضْرِبِي بِسَهْمَيْكِ فِي أَعْشَارِ قَلْبٍ مُقَتَّلِ. That he says, and your eyes never shed tears except they shoot arrows straight into this killed, torn heart of mine. Wah, 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 wah. But this is, people, this is Imra al-Qays, huh? And he has a very, which is proverbial, a kind of line where he says, وَلَيْلٍ كَمَوْجِ الْبَحْرِ أَرْخَى سُدُولَهُ عَلَيَّ بِأَنْوَاءِ الْهُمُومِ لِيَبْتَلِي. He says, and how many nights have kind of lowered the curtain of darkness over me. Like, he says, as though it's a kind of a wave overcoming me of water, a tide. And he says, only to do so with so many different problems and calamities to try me. It's amazing, He his thing is so. I would definitely advise people to kind of explore him. But my point was coming back to this thing that if Imra al-Qays, if the Prophet had done this, one, it would never it would never fly. People would catch it. Two, this kind of poetry, in all honesty, I am convinced with Taha Hussein's argument that really it was created during or recreated during the Abbasid period. So that this poetry, maybe parts of it or the message was kind of authentic, but I don't believe the finites and the wording is authentic. Because it's just not possible that these Arabs who lived in so many different parts of Arabia, they had the same dialect, that they spoke High Arabic like this. It's just not possible. I struggle to believe that they did. And I feel that what happened in the Abbasid period, early Abbasid period, there was a kind of like a craze, an archaic Arabic mining craze where people started to, let's seek out, oh, how do you say this in pure Arabic? How do you say this in High Arabic? Let's find Bedouins. Let's do this. Let's do that. And a lot was, at that time, that is the time when all this poetry surfaces as written formats. And I feel that people, they may have genuinely told these poems. I'm not saying that the people who told them were lying on purpose, but it may have been that it was told to them, but people along the way either added to them or they definitely Arabicized them into the High Arabic that we have. I don't believe that this was word by word verbatim and the dialect what the ancient pre-Islamic Arabs would have been using. I think this was later reinvented by many Muslims and reinforced to solidify Quranic language and teachings and things like. It was like basically Muslims were doing it. Some were seeking it out. Others were with this, demand this supply, and ultimately it was trying to reinforce that. Look, oh well, the Quranic language can be measured by this, but really, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I am inclined to Taha Hussein's argument. Cool. I do feel that the poetry is epic, and definitely the poetry has been around at least from the early Abbasid times. I mean, you're talking like at least 1200 years or so. But do I feel that these mu'allaqat were exactly the mu'allaqat that Nabigha spoke, and Aisha spoke, and Labid spoke, and Tarafa, and Imra al-Qays? I don't think so. And if you want to read more on that, you can read the book Shi'r al-Jahili by Taha Hussein. It's a very interesting book. But the stories of this guy were well transmitted. This poet Imra al-Qays were well transmitted. So this argument collapses really of whether it's Tisdale or they themselves, the Orientalists themselves, say we're not convinced. But even what Ismail in Don't Convert to Islam is saying, it doesn't really add up. All right, guys. With that, let's move on. Jack Bauer, somebody. Right, guys. I want to quickly. Can we say that hadith are verbatim prophetic words? I've answered this before. Most of the hadith are actually transmitted by meaning. I prefer Twinkle Twinkle Little Star than your complicated poetry. Well, Daniel, Steve, there must be some divine wisdom in why God hasn't opened up your mind to this poetry, and why God has left it with the cap at Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Star. There must be some divine wisdom in that after all. Who are we to challenge God's command and God's decree? This one, my friend, you sing Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Star. Okay, so right, so let's with that, let's take a look, people, at what's this? can we offer prayer as a janazah prayer as a form of protest? Possibly. I'm not familiar with this incident. I'll have to look into it. Yusuf Ahmed Zahabi is in the house, people. Sheikh Zahabi is in the house, the golden one. The real golden one. I know there's Abu Usama Zahabi, who also goes by that name. But look at Tversky saying, mut'ah. What is it with this obsession with mut'ah? I saw this clip where some guy in Hyde Park is saying, muta, we should do, the Muslims say muta. Right, guys, let's talk about this briefly, the far left. Look, reason I want to talk about this is because I feel, look, from a political perspective, I do believe that it's wrong to impose these paradigms on Islam or religion, especially Islam, about the left and right, because I don't feel Islam works in the same paradigmatic manner. Rather. So, but that said, I do accept in politics, of course, and I would myself agree that I am on the left. I agree, as in that is associated with more liberal values, in less control. You believe that you shouldn't be controlled by other people, by other governments, by you should have more freedom as a person. I am very much inclined that way, and I'm sure anybody who knows me knows me. The issue is, as a person who espouses such views, I see that the far left is a virus, a cancerous virus that really people who espouse leftist views ought to condemn. Because if you don't condemn it, what happens is the far right use that to brand everybody with this kind of political understanding. Just as people on the left sometimes, you see, you've got people on the right who may be very conservative in certain things and more about governments having some control, and in America maybe Republicans or whatever, here maybe conservatives and the Tories, but then you've got the far right who are usually very racist. They take these values and they're all about imposition, a fascist form of them. And people on the right are expected to condemn the far right. And obviously it makes perfect sense. Everybody should condemn them. But we should equally condemn the far left. It is unacceptable, some of the, this kind of impositionism, this kind of fascist form. It is exactly the same, except what they're saying is just different, but the attitudes are the same. And I want to highlight two key things with that message. One is on racism, and the other on, as the great scandal, obviously, sex. Right, but the first thing on racism. I read a story, you're doing black magic. Riz, ahlan wa sahlan. Right, so there have been discussions in the past, and I've even commented on this, on things like white privilege. Okay, I want to make something very clear, that is not an excuse for any kind, or a cloak. It should not be used as a cloak for any kind of racism towards white people. It is utterly unacceptable. Okay, it is not, like, I disagree wholeheartedly with that kind of stuff. And even this, this, when people speak massively, I know I gave examples that it is in this country as well. You do get it. There is this kind of discrimination. True, but this real kind of privilege that people are usually speaking about is really manifest in places like America. When they say, when a person, like, so for example, a person, there was this discussion of white people who became Muslim and then they have a lot of privileges. And so there were certain questions that, would we really consider certain scholars in the position they were if they weren't white? That does not apply, honestly. It's not manifest in the UK. And it is unacceptable to kind of try to guilt trip just normal, let's say, white converts to Islam by trying to say, like, apparently there's been things discussions and online where people are trying to say, oh, if you become a Muslim, as a white person, you need to disown your whiteness. What kind of BS is that? What kind of nonsense is that? You know, and I utterly condemn that kind of wokeism, right? This kind of alt wokeism. Like, I think this is cancerous. That's just fascism. You're just basically trying to use liberal words and words to do with human rights, and you're just doing the same thing. You're just attacking people. So, you know, people will say things like, oh, when a white person embraces Islam. So there's a person I know who actually received comments like this, like, oh, you're a white guy, you embraced Islam, and he married, I believe he married a black Muslim woman. Oh, you married a black woman just so you can subjugate a black woman, just so you can captivate an exotic body, just so you can, you know, like, oh, you did this because that further proves you're racist. Or you did it to prove, like, just so you can have it as a token trophy wife or something. You know, this kind of stuff, wallahi, people, it's so disheartening to hear this. I want to say very clearly, I have not seen in the UK, on the Islamic scene, any white privilege on the Islamic scene in the UK that's noticeable or that's actually been substantial that comes to my mind. Generally speaking, I don't, you know, monitor everybody's lives, but generally that comes to my mind for that discussion to even really hold any place in the places in countries like the UK. Yes, as a broader discussion, one could say that yes, there is discrimination in the country. Yes, there is, and that needs to be tackled. There are far right views; they need to be tackled. You know, there are these kinds. But let's face it, people. You don't. In this country, it's true that people with a certain accent will be equally discriminated against because they will come across. I mean, people who have a strong black country accent, the yam yam, they'll be discriminated against. White people, why do you think they all voted far right? Blame it on the immigrants, because people are just so fed up of like being, you know, living in poverty, living in, you know, that kind of estate culture that these people have. So it's not that if you're white, you're living a happy life here. Not at all. And I have come across some of these things, and it really disheartened me. So I wanted to set that straight. I first, you know, may Allah, any person who comes to this faith of any colour, and especially in this country, people have come to this faith, if they're white, you know, that is a great struggle in and of itself for them, and may Allah bless them, may Allah bless their lives, may Allah, you know, give them all kinds of happiness and protect them from this kind of cancerous, hateful, bitter people. So I just wanted to make that, and I may, you know, some people may be upset about this. I mean, I don't think they should be, but if they are, tough luck. I say it as it is. So that's one thing. Yeah, because it creates, you know, Ben here is saying, and you know, he's witnessed this firsthand. And so the thing is that, look, it creates a vicious cycle, because then they become more distant. And then they hate more on the other people, and then they hate more on the other, and it's a horrible cycle. So I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing, people with this ultra wokeism on sex. Let's talk about sex. Is that, look, I really can't stand this demonizing sex or lust. Like, what? Look, these are just creature instincts. You know, people will be, you know, this whole thing, because I said what I said about Ustad Osama Khan. I want to set the record straight. The other day, I got into this back-forth Twitter clash here with some lady called Ruqayya Harris. Now, I don't know her, but I mean, now obviously I know of her. So she kind of said about my Osama Khan tweet that it's because of people. Basically, it's so shocking that people like me being a mufti will, you know, use this to justify the action of these people, blah, 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 blah. This is so, honestly, so I did respond in a crude way because, look, she said that it's not naivety, because I had said that, look, what you're arguing is the classical fiqh position. You're trying to say that women, because in classical fiqh, they said women can take care of all affairs except nikah. Because apparently in nikah, men will just take advantage of them. So they always need a man to conduct their nikah, a wali. Now, I personally argued against that. I said that I was in line with those people. Women are just as capable. They know what they're doing. You know, they're not naive. But to say, well, oh no, that, you know, men, what it is women just don't know when a person is, you know, like they don't expect a person to have sexual cravings, and if he has these sexual cravings, he's a sexual predator. This is wrong language, man. This kind of stuff. Look, these things you to conflate between clear crimes. There are people who are sexual predators. They attack usually not only vulnerable but usually underage victims, sexually abuse them. These things are crimes. There's a legal system in place to catch these people. You know, to say that, oh, a bunch of women agreed to have a private short-term nikah with a guy and then it didn't end well, that's in no way, there's no sense of force there. You know, that's not a, yes, it might not be a nice thing, it might be a horrible thing. Maybe the guy, you know, as they were saying, he was a jerk, maybe he was. But to say, like, just because it was a bad decision, and, you know, I should have thought more wisely, oh, it must have been abuse. That's not true. There was no force. You know, you may have been persuaded, but it wasn't force. You could have just said no. So, yes, I did respond by saying, look, I said, look, if you open your legs every time a man asks you to, I think that's more a muscle reflex issue. You should see a doctor. So they got really offended. And they said, well, you know, these men, you know, they just didn't, you know, and then obviously she got so, I hit a nerve, honestly. She goes, oh, this guy, you know, you've this, and you've got a criminal record, and you've got this, and you've got that. And I thought, okay, so I wrote, wow, that turned personal real quick, didn't it? Oppressed turns oppressor within one tweet. And, oh, you know, there's this, oh, you lost your job because you watched porn. And I was like, well, I didn't though, but okay. I mean, I didn't lose my job. So it's like, well, oh, okay, you know, I don't need your opinion on this, and, oh, potential, you know, what is it? What's the word? But anyway, these kind of like sexual predators and these kind of things, and you think, whoa, 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 calm down, lady. First of all I've said is it takes two people to tango. You know, like, I agree. I've agreed from the very offset that these things, I've never agreed with them. I've said, look, people shouldn't use the religion, like, shouldn't be an imam trying to lure in women and things like this. But if a woman goes to a man and don't be surprised, don't be shocked that men want to have sex with women. Don't be shocked about that. Don't act like, oh my God, well, oh my God, really? You think, no. How do you think your mother conceived? The Immaculate Conception. You know, if your dad wasn't lustful, you wouldn't be here today. So just to demonize lust and to say, well, if men have lust, which they do, but, you know, it may not be a nice thing. It's like saying human beings have greed. It's not a nice thing, but they have it. You're telling me most people would not want your money. They would. You know, if most people could get your money from you and they could get away with it, they would. That's the nature of this world. So don't be so shocked. You know, just, it's a bad, yeah, it's bad, but it's a bad decision. You know, it's like the analogy. Imagine your friend persuaded you to pull off some robbery, and he said, "Oh, I've got all these things, and I've got this massive scam, and we're going to pull it off, and I've got all the tools." And you think, well, I don't know, you know, I don't know. And the guy said, "Trust me. Oh, you're gonna love this." So you say, "Well, go on then." And then you go along, and they pull it off, but you're the only one who gets caught. That's got to be one crappy situation to be in. And you got to feel absolutely horrible. I get that. But you think if you say to the judge, "Oh, I was abused into that situation," I don't think so. Was it a bad decision? Yeah. Do you feel horrible? Hell yeah. Especially since the other people got away with it. And it was initially their plan. But this is why you have the voice of reason. And you know, if you feel so vulnerable, then use a wali. Go with the traditional classic fiqh position that, look, okay, I'm not going to conduct a nikah. I'm always going to have a man that will conduct it for me. Because men obviously suss other men out straight away. You know, men know. They're like, that rascality. Oh, you. Right. So I just feel that, look, I was in no way, I want to be clear on this, saying that it was a good thing that what these imams are doing. But I was just saying, let's be fair. It's not abuse. It's a horrible decision. It's a crappy decision that you've made, and you regret it, and you feel horrible because the person's rejected you afterwards and treated you like a moron, which he may have or may not have. But the point is, there's no force. So let's just be real. So I wanted to kind of tackle that. But yeah, so this thing of trying to force this onto people, creating this kind of like man-hating, you know, men are dogs and they just, you know, I hate men. Somebody commented about me, "Oh, I used to think this Mufti Abu Layth was okay, but now I just, you know, I just can't bother with men." Well, you're going to surely live a happy life, ain't you? Why not? Look, I mean, why this hatred? Men don't hate women. I mean, that's the problem. Look at Imra al-Qays, our hero. And don't demonize. I agree with people should try to control certain desires. I agree with that. But we shouldn't, just because people have desires, try to treat them like monsters. Because men, you're going to say, "Oh, men have sexual desires. There's lust, they're evil, they're all predators." You think, whoa, calm down. It's a bit a bit too fired up. All right, people. On that note, I want to speak about the Prince Andrew interview. People, if you have not watched this interview, you have to watch this interview of Prince Andrew giving an interview on justifying himself with Epstein. So basically, they've said, "Look, you spent several days with Epstein, and you've kept so many years of contact, and what's this all about?" So what he says is in his interview, they go, "Well, here's a young lady, a girl, teenager at the time, who's come forward and said, well, she's had sex with you on many occasions and had orgies with you and things like this, and you know, she was just a teenager at the time, and you know, and here's a photograph of you standing with her." So he's standing there with this shirt like open a bit, and I don't know whether it's a club or some kind of thing, and it's not a club, but some kind of, I don't know, party, and he's got his arm around her waist, and they say, "Well, and here's a photo. She's produced a photograph of you two together." So he says, "Well," he doesn't say the hand isn't mine. He does better than that. He goes, well, you see, you see, I want to say I have no recollection of this event, of ever meeting this lady, and I know that is not true because when I travel, I always wear a tie, and I'm clearly not wearing a tie in that photograph, so it could not be me, because when I travel, my travel clothes are always with a tie. It's just, you know, I no tie, it just can't be me. then he's asked. They ask him, "Are you suggesting this photograph is fake? Are you suggesting this photograph is fake?" Well, first of all, nobody can prove that it's that actually took place, and that's. I just want to say nobody can prove it. And then the best people, check this out. I don't know how, no wonder his PR guy told him don't do the interview. The moment he did, that guy quit. They said, well, she has a vivid memory of you that, look, she met you at this club. And he says, well, another reason that can clearly not be me is because I remember on that day I went to a Pizza Express with Beatrice in Woking. I remember that I went to. They're like, well, why do you remember that so clearly? Why would you remember going to Pizza Express? Because I'm royalty. I clearly do not go to Pizza Express, and I've only ever been. I do not go to Woking, so I've only been there on 2 or 3 occasions. So I would clearly remember. I was with Beatrice. And we went to a Pizza Express. And then the guy says, the lady says that, right, and she says in her description, she was with you all night, they had, that later on you had sex and you did this, and she says that she remembers about you that you would sweat profusely, that this was, she mentions it in her description. What would you like to say about that? Oh, well, you see, I've actually stopped, I actually don't sweat. I had an injury in the Falklands War. I was fighting in the Falklands War. After the war, because of the shock, I just do not sweat anymore. I've given up on sweating, and recently I've only started to sweat again. So no, that can clearly not be me. I just do not sweat. People, what the hell was that? What the hell? Oh, sorry, I've got to plug this in. Oh. Oh, is that charging? Is that... right, so this, oh my God, was so hilarious. Honestly, you've got to watch it. Sweat, well, I've stopped doing that. You couldn't make up that interview if you tried. Please watch it for the love of God. So funny. Right, guys, we're going to have to start to wrap this up. Before we wrap this up, there's been some news that I dabble in the dark arts, people. So some guy, Umar Mustafa, I don't really know him, but I think he studies somewhere in Saudi, I think, American, I believe. He became possessed, allegedly, last year, by his own admission. He made some refutations against me. And after the refutations, he began to become ill and weird, and his strange things started to happen. So he approached an exorcist, as you do. And the exorcist successfully exorcised him. And the jinn spoke. And the jinn spoke in a thick, no Freudian slip there, in a thick British accent. Oh, rather, oh my, Abdurrahman, what am I doing over here, good fella? Cheerio. So the jinn spoke in a thick British accent. This is in his words. He put this on Twitter. And they said, they were forced, and they gave me up. They said that Abu Layth has sent us to destroy your life. For doing refutations against him. So the jinn, these jinn ain't loyal. These jinn not loyal, you know. Bewafa jinn, zalim jinn, they infama jinn. These jinn have had it. But now I've got some solid military grade trained jinn on the case.
Omar. So people, Omar, I warned you. Now, people, I've got with us today as a mini representation of Omar. Omar, I warned you. And the thobe is not doing isbal. Look, it's above the ankle. Right. His memory. And because part of his thobe is under is doing isbal, it's below the ankle pain. Oh, dark spirits, I summon thee. Shower down on Omar with calamity. Oh. Omar, you better watch out now. This one not nice, you know, my friend. Oh, damn. Zara's going to be looking for a penguin. There goes, oh no, there goes his Hadith study. I just knocked it out of his head. Oh, right, so you see, people, look, this is what happens. I tell people that jinn possession doesn't happen. Oh, by the way, they said that was part of my plot. The greatest trick the devil ever did was to convince people he didn't exist. And then like that, he was gone. So they're saying that's part of my magnificent plot to make people believe that jinns can't possess people, and then I send the jinn to possess them. I gotta say though, one thing I gotta say seriously, these people give me so much credit. They leave me in a confused position, you know, because I partially want to admire them for giving me so much credit. So I wore this because I'm, one, the Halloween, and two, because of dabbling in the dark arts. So obviously, as I've got my victim here, who's studying in Medina University in Saudi Arabia, and because he's been refuting Malm, nobody refutes Malm. Oh, wait there. Oh, no, no, no. Oh, people, relax, people. I'm going to revive him later on. Right, so this is the thing. Look, I want to say, seriously, this is the problem. I thought first this was a joke. Yeah, I thought that they were just joking around, trying to say, well, oh, you know, Malm has sent some jinns after us. But then I realized they're actually genuine. And this is why I clearly warn against this kind of superstitious belief. That just look at this. I mean, look at the kind of misery that they self-impose. And I tell you something,